Good morning, everyone. Feels kind of weird to be here at 10 o'clock in the morning, missing my tech committee meeting, but I'm here with my friends, so that's cool with me. Anyway, welcome to today's presentation. I'm still Don, and Susie's still Susie, but she's got a little bit of a tuneful tummy, so she's not going to try to spread that around today. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about India's culture. We're going to focus today on the many different religions of the country. And in our next presentation will be about the political history and a little bit about things like the sultans and the Raj and of course the Taj Mahal. We started giving this presentation on our very first visit to the country of India, at least by ship. We'd been there before by plane. But the first time we went there, we were kind of confused because there are so many different religions that we thought that the travelers should know a little bit more about what that was all about. As we sailed to India, we learned that it is home to many varied and different religions. While I'm in no way a spiritual scholar, Susie and I are very interested in comparative religions, and we do a lot of reading on the subject. Now today, we'd like you to watch for the patterns in the various beliefs that are being handed down as new religions came up in India and as they developed across the millennia. These are India's major religions. There's many more than this, but these are the majors. This lecture will be presented in chronological order based on when the religion first started. And that can give you a little bit of a grasp how the movement sort of began and how they built upon each other. We'll explore the various concepts of life after death and the tenets by which people should live their lives within each of these religions. Most develop a pretty familiar theme that run throughout. Now, some notes. The dates that are shown are approximate, but all but one, that's Jainism, believe in a single supreme God, except maybe Buddhism, which has a central figure, not necessarily God. We'll start with a basic description of Judaism and then segue to the Jewish history in India. Religious literature recites the story of the Israelites going back at least as far as Abraham around 1800 BC. The Torah, or the 5 books of Moses, retells the story of how the family of Abraham became the people of Israel. They came back from exile in Egypt under the leadership of Moses to the border of the land of Israel. On the way, as most people know, they stopped at Mount Sinai for the revelation of what are known as the 10 Commandments. I guess you could say that means the official religion was founded around 1200 BC. Children of a Jewish mother are considered Jews. This is the genetic picture of one. They believe in one God whose laws govern daily life. There isn't anything after life because the Jews believe that life never ends. It just goes higher and higher. In the afterlife, the soul is liberated from the body and returns closer to her source than ever before. Some believe that Jews came to India as early as King Solomon's time in 957 BC. But the first documented real settlers were the so-called Black Jews. They were descendants of Jews who fled Europe during the Inquisition, and they were in search of religious freedom. Most of them were from Portugal and had darker skin, therefore the name. The first Portuguese Jews to arrive in India were sailors. Their communities are found in and around the former Portuguese dominions and territories in India, pretty much at Kochi. The unofficial emblem of Kochi, India, is a half dozen of these giant cantilevered Chinese fishing nets. They're a legacy of traders that came back in AD 1400 in the era of Kublai Khan. They're 30-foot tall nets, and they rest on bamboo poles that require 5 or 6 people to operate the counterweights at high tide. The nets were in Kochi when the second wave, called the White Jews, arrived from Western Europe. In 1524, the Jewish colony in Kochi was attacked by the Moors. The Moors didn't do this on a religious basis. They were Muslims who came from Africa, but they attacked because it was alleged that the Jews were interfering with their pepper trade. Built in 1568, the Kochi Synagogue is the oldest in all of the British Commonwealth of Nations. It's also known as the Paradisi, or Foreigners' Synagogue. In keeping with the local Hindu and Islamic traditions, everyone who enters this synagogue must be barefoot. The Jews in Kochi established a community that lasted for centuries. The Hindus granted them land in what is now known today as Jewtown. When Portugal occupied Kochi, they persecuted the Jews. Remember, at that time, Portugal was in the same Inquisition process as Spain. And that persecution went on until the Dutch arrived in about 1650. Well, the Dutch were a lot more tolerant. This is a photograph from 1900, and it's of Jewish people from Baghdad, Persia. They traced their roots back to oil pressers, and they settled in Mumbai. And that was in the 1800s after coming from Persia to escape the religious persecution that they felt there. They were also interested in the commercial opportunities that Mumbai offered. The Jews found it easy to move between the East and the West, and they became very successful traders and bankers. They kept their distinct culture and Arabic language. Later on, just as with most of India, English became a preferred language, and the Jews adopted Western-style clothing. Shown here is a naming ceremony at the Jewish synagogue in Mumbai, India. Today, nearly 14 million Jewish people live all over the world. Approximately half live in the United States, and 1/4 live in Israel. There are only some 5,000 Jews left in India today, but it was once a thriving community. At its peak in the late 1940s, the Jewish population of Mumbai alone reached nearly 30,000. But they're still being persecuted in India. In 2008, a terrorist attack in Mumbai killed 6 people at the Jewish Outreach Center. That said, though, relations between the Jewish and other city religious communities remain strong, even in view of the attacks. Hinduism began in India. Today, there are over 1 billion followers worldwide. About 80% of the Indian population regard themselves as Hindu. It's kind of hard to define Hinduism due to its many practices and beliefs. Most believe in one supreme God. The God's form and qualities are represented by many different deities, and we'll look at a few. Oh, when I say many, I'm talking about perhaps as many as 30,000. Elephanta Island in Mumbai was named for a huge stone elephant that was found there by Portuguese navigators. The Elephanta cave temples were carved out of solid rock during the Hindu era that was known as the Vedic period. That was between the 8th and 9th century. This cave is said to be the home of the Hindu god Shiva. It's called Lord Shiva in their terminology. It was designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site to preserve its artwork. Lord Shiva is often shown deep in meditation with his wife and children, as depicted here. He is one of a trinity of the most divine characters who are often shown slaying dragons. Lord Shiva is also symbolized as a lingam. Lingam is a male figure of creative energy, or put it more bluntly, the phallus. Most Hindus view the linga as a symbol of divine energy. Lingam and yoni have been interpreted by practitioners as the male and female organs since the end of the 19th century. Mumbai's name comes from this local Hindu goddess. Mumba was originally the patron of the salt collectors and fisher folk. Mumba was considered the great mother and the consort of Lord Shiva. In 1534, the Portuguese gained control of the province. They changed the name to Bombahia. That means good bay in Portuguese. The English later on changed it to Bombay. However, that name was dropped in 1995 because the Indian government at the time believed it was a stamp of the British colonialism on the city. And today, again, we know it as Mumbai. Lord Krishna is another major deity in Hinduism. He's worshipped at the eighth avatar or sub-god and sometimes a supreme god in his own right. Krishna is the god of compassion, tenderness, and love in Hinduism. Now the Hindus worship cows because they were the pets of Lord Krishna. Cattle are considered sacred in various religions, most notably Hinduism and Jainism. Cattle being sacred is not a new concept in Hinduism. Cows were revered in ancient religions of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. According to Hindu scripture, it is prohibited to consume beef. Bovine milk holds a key in many religious rituals. It's customary to lead a cow through a house as part of the housewarming ceremony. It's considered good luck to give a cow a snack or fruit before breakfast. Some people touch the back of their cows, freely wandering in the streets of India, and even at times they'll kiss them. Hey, I know what I want to come back in at my next life, a Hindu cow. Many Hindus who are vegetarians will not use any kind of leather. In religiously diverse countries such as India, leather vendors are very careful to label the kinds of leather used in their products. And you have to note that in some buildings around the world, mostly in India, you cannot even enter the building wearing a bovine leather belt or carrying a leather purse. These various beliefs increase the demand for neutral leathers, such as ostrich and deer. Oh, in a way, a Hindu can avoid, cow leather, and a Muslim will not accidentally buy a pigskin leather because of the way they're labeled. Hindus believe souls pass through a cycle of successive lives. The ultimate goal is enlightenment attained through meditation and prayer. Your next incarnation depends on how your previous life was lived. The cycle of birth, death, and rebirth are all governed by karma. And karma means you get rewards for good behavior and are punished for bad. In other words, you get out of life what you put into it. Veda is a Sanskrit term meaning knowledge. They are the sacred scriptures of Hindu that talk about dharma. Dharma is a code of conduct, law, or duty that outlines good behavior. Dharma is the moral order of the universe. It's a way of living that embodies the fundamental principles of law and religion that governs all of reality. By following one's dharma, a person can eventually achieve liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth. And also, cows are a symbol of dharma. Followers of Hinduism are most likely to believe in the concept of rebirth for humans. And in the near-death experience, people seem to be going through a tunnel. In Hindu, they feel the soul embodied by the human flesh will take refuge in a different form after death. That's said to be necessary to accomplish any of its unfulfilled desires. While the classification of people into caste has been identified with Hinduism in the past, it was carried over to Buddhism, Islam, and Sikhism. For centuries, the caste system determined every aspect of a person's social, professional, and religious status in India. When India became an independent nation, its constitution banned discrimination based on caste. Well, they might have said that, but caste-related discrimination and violence continues to be reported. Even so, in 2007, the Supreme Court of India ruled that social organization based on caste is inherited and cannot be changed. The Brahmin are the intellectual and spiritual leaders, the priests and scholars, if you will. Brahmin perform rituals and sacrifice, including the worship and praise of the forces of nature and the oneness of all beings and of all elements. According to a 2007 report, Brahmin in India make up about 5% of its total population. To give you an idea, that's about 40 million people. Kind of tells you how big the population of India is. A Wall Street Journal article reported that an estimated 65% of those people, of those households in India, lived on less than $100 a month. That number dropped to about 50% of them in 2007, so obviously they were a little better off. But nonetheless, it gives you an idea of the level of poverty across the country. The untouchables are a class of citizens that are considered to be the lowest level of the social hierarchy. Their official designation is now scheduled caste. Traditionally, these groups were those people who had occupations and habits of life that were ritually polluting activities, if you will, such as taking a life, like a fisherman, or disposing of dead cattle or hides. They were those who would eat beef, pigs, and chickens. And it's a category into which most of the indigenous tribes of India fell. These restrictions led to many untouchables to seek some degree of emancipation through conversion to Christianity, Islam, or Buddhism. The President of India from 1997 until 2002 was the first member of a scheduled caste to occupy a high office in the country. At the time, the landless laborer pointed to a picture that was on the wall of Hanuman. That's a Hindu monkey god that was on his wall. He said it will soon be gone and would be replaced by an image of the Buddha. Being Buddhist means that we will be separate but equal. The scheduled castes are also included in such occupational groups as sweepers and washermen. The washers, known locally as dobies, are an example of being born into their job through caste identification. Dobie Ghat is an enormous open-air laundry of Sulis. She was a deity worshipped as Sulis Minerva. Inscribed lead tablets suggest that she was a nourishing, life-giving mother goddess. She was also known for curses. I guess that works. Messages to her were scratched onto metal, and they were known as curse tablets. And a lot of those were found at Bath. About 130 curse tablets, mostly addressed to Sulis, were found thrown into the spring. Typically, the text related to theft, for example, of small amounts of money or clothing that was stolen from the bathhouse. One message read, quote, "Antonius has lost 2 gloves and asked that the thief responsible should lose their minds and eyes in the goddess's temple," unquote. That's strong stuff. Excavations at the bottom of the spring have brought to light some sacred offerings. Found were over 12,000 coins spanning the entire Roman era, and they reveal the concept that throwing of coins into a spring or a fountain is a universal and ancient human behavior. In 2012, some 30,000 silver 3rd century Roman coins were unearthed just a little over a football field away from the Roman baths, some 350 or 400 yards. It's one of the largest caches discovered anywhere in Britain. Founded in the 7th century, Bath Abbey has a cruciform plan. That meant that it was built in the shape of a cross. It can seat about 1,200 people and is lighted with 52 windows. The Norman church was built on an earlier foundation. By the 15th century, the church was badly dilapidated. The bishop decided to rebuild it on a smaller scale, and a new church was completed in just a few years. The Abbey Church was restored again as the city's parish church during the Elizabethan era. A student of chemistry and medicine from Oxford University moved to Bath, and there he wrote about the health-giving properties of the hot mineral waters. The city began to boom. The Royal Crescent was built between 1767 and 1774, and it has a curved portico. It appears to be about 30 individual houses if you look at it from the front. But each purchaser bought a certain length of that facade and then employed their own architect to build the house to their specification behind the facade. What appears to be 2 houses is sometimes just one. And that system of town planning can be seen when you look at the rear of that crescent, because you see houses have different heights, different depths, different shapes on the back. The circus at Bath is 3 long curved terraces that were designed to form a circular space or a theater. It was intended to be used for civic functions or for games. The circus was inspired by the Roman Colosseum in Italy. And like the Colosseum, the 3 facades on the circus have different styles of architecture on each floor, the building being progressively more ornate as you go up. In the 18th century, the Grand Pump Room was attached to the baths. It was a meeting place for the upper class. Here they could listen to musicians playing classical music whilst sipping on a glass of healthy local water. I bet some of them put something in the water. Today, visitors can still sample the waters from the warm spring. Well, it's not quite the original stuff because in 1983, they drilled a new borehole that was sunk to provide clean, safe supply of spa water for drinking. Now, I have to tell you, when you go there, the water does smell kind of a little bit off. Arguably, Bath's most famous resident was Jane Austen. She was an English novelist in the late 18th century. Most of her work revolves around the delicate business of providing husbands for marriageable daughters. Isn't that nice? What about wives for marriageable sons? I don't know. Anyway, her father was a clergyman. When he retired, the family moved to Bath and they lived there for several years. Today, Bath features a permanent exhibition that tells the story of Jane Austen's experiences in the city. And the pump room itself was featured in several of her novels. Bath is linked to a variety of foods that are distinctively associated with the city. Sally Lunn was a Huguenot refugee who came to Bath back in 1680, escaping persecution in France. She worked in the kitchen of a bakery on Lilliput Alley. Around Bath Abbey, she sold the baker's wares from a basket. The building, now known as Sally Lunn's Eating House, is a medieval building. It was acquired in the 1930s by Marie Bing Johnson, who opened it as a tea room specializing in Sally Lunn's buns. Makes you hungry, doesn't it? Marie promptly, she promoted them with a story that she had discovered their ancient secret recipe in a secret cupboard in the building. The Sally Lunn's buns are an enriched yeast bread or tea cake. Bath also lent its name to other distinctive recipes. Bath Olivers are a dry baked biscuit invented by Dr. William Oliver. He was a physician at the Mineral Water Hotel, which was at that time operated in Bath back in 1740. Oliver was an early anti-obesity campaigner, and his biscuits were part of a diet that he prescribed for those taking the waters. When Oliver died, he left his coachman 100 pounds, 100 bags of flour, and the recipe for the biscuits. Now, you can still buy the biscuits today, and his image is stamped on each side of every biscuit. This is London Bridge, but it's not in London anymore, it's in Arizona. Still, it's a great segue into our PVE stretch for today. So please sing along with whatever movement you can make. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. Built it up with wood and clay, wood and clay, wood and clay. Build it up with wood and clay, my fair lady. Wood and clay will wash away, wash away, wash away. Wood and clay will wash away, my fair lady. Thank you. Good job. All right, let's move on to another of England's World Heritage Sites, the Tower of London. It was originally located in the southeastern corner of the city, and it was intended to intimidate the locals. William, the Duke of Normandy, also known as William the Conqueror, built it following his victory in 1066. He was crowned the King of England that December. Some of the stone for the tower was imported from Normandy, and Norman masons were used for its design. But the majority of the labor was done by Englishmen. By 1100, the White Tower was complete. It was the first of many Norman castles that were built in England, and they were all built of stone. And nothing like that had quite ever been seen in the English countryside. The tower was immense at 118 by 106 feet. It dominated the skyline for miles around. The tower has Roman walls on two sides, ditches to the north and west, and an earthwork topped by a wooden palisade. Many kings and queens stayed at the tower, but it was never intended as a royal residence. The tower's primary function was as a fortress stronghold, and that role remained unchanged well into the 19th century. Now let's look at some of the interesting things that happened in it. The Tower of London's first prisoner was Ranulph Flambard. He was the chief tax collector imprisoned by King Henry I. He was also the tower's first escapee, and shown here in a reenactment. Flambard, by the way, stole a little bit of the king's money, so that wasn't a good thing to do. Anyway, he had a rope smuggled to him in a barrel of wine. Corker wine, I think. And he used that wine to get his guards drunk. And while they slept, he climbed down using the rope, and at the foot of the tower, his friends had horses ready, and he galloped off to safety in the night. Arguably, one of the most famous executions at the Tower of London was that of Anne Boleyn. King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn were married in January of 1533. Anne was crowned Queen of England, and in September she gave birth to the future Queen Elizabeth I. Oh my, what a busy year. 3 miscarriages followed, and within a few years, Henry was courting Jane Seymour. Anne was an educated and influential queen with strong opinions, and because of this, there were vicious court and religious factions that rose up against her. Her failure to produce a son for the king also made her position precarious. Anne was investigated for high treason, adultery, incest, witchcraft. Oh, come on. Modern historians view those charges as unconvincing. Nevertheless, she was arrested and tried before a jury that included her own uncle. Henry commuted Anne's sentence from burning at the stake to beheading. Now, that's not much of a commute to me, but rather than have her beheaded with a common axe, he brought a swordsman from France to perform the execution. Accompanied by 2 female attendants, Anne walked from the Queen's house to the scaffold. She wore a red petticoat under this sounds like a fashion description, under a loose, dark gray gown of damask trimmed with fur, and she had a mantle of ermine. The ermine mantle was removed, and Anne removed her headdress. She tucked her hair into a coif. She knelt upright in the French style of execution. Isn't that nice? After a brief farewell to her weeping ladies and a request for prayers, one of the ladies tied a blindfold over Anne's eyes. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter, and her skeleton was identified during renovations of that chapel in 1876. Another interesting tale is that of Arbella Stewart. Her ghost is believed to haunt the Tower of London. Arbella was a noblewoman seen as a possible successor to Queen Elizabeth I. It was something to which she actually never aspired to herself. Arbella married William Seymour in 1610. Their marriage was for some reason seen as a threat by King James, who had refused to give his permission for their marriage. Arbella was put under house arrest and Seymour sent to the Tower of London. Arbella escaped and disguised herself as a man, plotted to get Seymour released so they could travel to France. He was smuggled out of the tower, but unfortunately, they missed their rendezvous. Poor Arbella set sail for France all alone. She was recognized and sent back, this time to the Tower of London. William Seymour made it to freedom in France, but he never saw Arbella again. In her final days, Arbella refused to eat. She fell ill and died. Or you never know, she might have been murdered. She was buried in Westminster Abbey. In the 19th century, Arbella's lead coffin was found in the vault of Mary, Queen of Scots. It had been placed directly on top of the Scots Queen. The story is that Arbella's ghost haunts the cell where she was imprisoned. That's the cell. Tough place. Major General Geoffrey Field was governor of the Tower of London from 1994 to 2006. He and his family lived in the Queen's house on the Tower grounds, and he tells this story. Quote, "Soon after we'd arrived, my wife was making up the bed in the Lennox room when she felt a violent push in her back, which propelled her right out of the room. No one had warned us that the house was haunted. But then we discovered that every resident has experienced something strange in that room. Several women who slept there since have reported waking in terror in the middle of the night, feeling they were being strangled. So just in case, we made it a house rule not to give unaccompanied female guests the Lennox room," unquote. Oi, take it easy. This is an English heritage site. During the Second World War, bombs damaged London considerably, and a number of the buildings were destroyed, including the mid-19th century North Bastion of the Tower of London. At the time, the tower's moat was used for vegetable gardens for the English people. Today, the Queen's crown jewels are on display in the Tower of London. The fact that any of the crown jewels remain unharmed is astonishing considering their past. It's believed that King John lost them in 1216. Edward III used them as collateral to pay his troops in the 14th century. The wife of Charles I pawned the jewels at the beginning of the Civil War. Then Oliver Cromwell ordered the crown to be broken apart. He wanted that to symbolize the destruction of the monarchy. The crown jewels were nearly stolen in 1671. An Irishman named Colonel Blood knocked the jewel house keeper in the head with a mallet. Then he squashed the arches of the King Charles II state crown so he could hide it under his cloak. Anyway, the jewels survived all of that. As part of the royal collection, the crown jewels holds deep religious and cultural significance in English history. St. Edward's crown is worn at the moment the monarch is crowned at Westminster. Named after the medieval Saint King Edward the Confessor, this solid gold crown from 1661 was used most recently at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. And oh yeah, it wasn't really that recent. 6 decades or so, that's pretty close. Anyway, the imperial crown that's shown is worn by the Queen at the opening of Parliament. It's one of the youngest crowns in the collection, and it holds a number of much older gems. The crown of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was set with 2,800 diamonds, including its most famous diamond, the Koh-i-Noor, or Mountain of Light. The enormous 530-plus carat known as the Cullinan 1 diamond is the largest colorless cut diamond in the world. It is showcased in the sovereign scepter with a cross. The whole object is decorated with 333 diamonds, 31 rubies, 15 emeralds, 7 sapphires, 6 spinels, and 1 amethyst. I wonder if they could put any more on it. The Cullinan was part of a rough diamond found in South Africa in 1905. It was named after the chairman of the mining company, but it's also known as the Great Star of Africa. In 1907, the Transvaal colony government in South Africa bought the Cullinan and presented it to King Edward VII. Now let's turn our attention to Westminster Abbey, one of UNESCO's most famous World Heritage Sites. It's large, and it's mainly Gothic, and it's in the style that was founded back in 960 AD. Think about that. That's 1,059 years ago. And it was completed after it was founded about 105 years later. Well, completed is really a bit of oxymoron because they rebuilt and rebuilt. Anyway, an oral history of the building says that a young fisherman named Aldrich on the Thames River had a vision of St. Peter near the site that the abbey is on now. When Benedictine monks began to worship there, it was called St. Peter's Abbey. Around 1042, King Edward the Confessor began rebuilding St. Peter's Abbey to provide himself with a royal burial church. Harold II, who succeeded Edward, was intensely devoted to him, and he rebuilt the abbey in Anglo-French Gothic style as a shrine to venerate Edward. Harold also wanted a suitably regal setting for his own tomb under the highest nave in England. But the first documented coronation here was that of William the Conqueror in 1066. Westminster Abbey's entire eastern end was completed in 1260 when a second construction stage began. It's done in Gothic style, and it expanded the nave across an additional 5 bays. That brought the building to the 1 bay beyond the choir. Westminster Abbey has at least 16 monarchs and 8 prime ministers interred there. From the time of Edward the Confessor until the death of George III in 1760, most kings and queens were buried there. All monarchs who died after George were placed at Windsor Castle. Queen Victoria and Edward III are buried at Frogmore, where the royal family has a private cemetery. The coronation chair encloses the famous Stone of Scone. No, not the little things you have at breakfast with raisins in them. This was a stone that was brought from Scotland in 1296. It's considered one of the most precious and famous pieces of furniture and stone in the world. It's been the centerpiece of coronations for over 700 years. For the ceremony, it's placed in the center of the abbey in front of the high altar. An additional renovation was completed at the abbey in 1517, and the towers were added in the 18th century. The abbey is the burial site of more than 3,300 persons. Burials include generals, admirals, politicians, poets, doctors, and scientists such as Sir Isaac Newton in 1726 and Charles Darwin in 1882. Now let's look a little bit at several of the more famous or infamous ones. Sir Isaac Newton was a mathematician, physicist, astronomer, theologian, and author who is widely recognized as one of the most influential scientists of all time. He was a key figure in the scientific revolution, best known for his law of universal gravity and for the development of the mathematical discipline calculus that high school kids have learned to love over the years. Oliver Cromwell became an independent Puritan after a religious conversion in the 1630s. He served as Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland from 1653 until his death in 1658. Westminster Abbey suffered damage during the 1640s when it was attacked by Cromwell's Puritan iconoclasts. Now, iconoclasm is a belief in the destruction of icons for religious and political reasons. So Cromwell wasn't really well liked by the people around Westminster, but nonetheless, he was given an elaborate funeral and burial in Westminster Abbey. Cromwell's body was disinterred from the abbey 3 years after his burial. They weren't satisfied, so he was hanged from a gibbet, and then his body was thrown into his pit. Well, before that, they cut his head off and they put it on a pole outside Westminster Hall until 1685. So if you think about that, it's almost 30 years his head was sticking on a pole out there. His actual remains today are in an unmarked grave. During the 19th century, a plain flat stone was placed at the site of Cromwell's earlier burial in Westminster. The old Cromwell vault was used as a burial place for Charles II's illegitimate descendants. Westminster Abbey's two western towers were built between 1722 and 1745. They were constructed of Portland stone to an early Gothic revival design. Purebeck marble was used for the walls and the floors in the building, but various tombstones are made of many different kinds of marble. Now, Westminster did suffer minor damage during World War II Blitz when the roof was hit by incendiary bombs. All of them were extinguished except for one, which ignited the wooden beams and plaster vault over the north transept. Flames spread, burning beams and molten lead fell to the wooden stalls, pews, and other ecclesiastic fixtures 130 feet below. Despite the falling debris, the staff dragged away as much of the furniture as possible before they had to withdraw. Finally, the lantern roof crashed down into the crossing, and that prevented the fires from spreading any further. Just inside the great west door of Westminster Abbey is the tomb of the unknown warrior. He was an unidentified British soldier killed in battle during the First World War. He was buried in the Abbey on 11 November 1920. There are many, many graves on the floors of the Abbey. This is the only one on which it is forbidden to step or walk. The ashes of the physicist Stephen Hawking were interred in the Abbey on 15 June 2018 near Isaac Newton. His memorial stone bears the inscription, quote, here lies what was mortal of Stephen Hawking, 1942 to 2018, unquote. It includes a form of the Blackenstein-Hawking entropy equation relating to black holes. That's a little tidbit for you scientific-minded people. Today, Westminster Abbey has two towers that reach a height of 225 feet, and the towers house 10 bells. The Abbey nave is 85 feet wide, and the church has a floor area of over 32,000 square feet. Westminster Abbey Choir is known worldwide as one of the finest choirs of its type. It's comprised of 30 boys, all of whom attend the Abbey Choir School, and 12 professional adult singers. The choir's main role is to sing daily choral services in the Abbey, as it has done for more than 6 centuries. And no, the little boys are not 600 years old. At least I don't think so. It also plays a central part in royal, state, and national occasions. In recent years, these have included things like a royal wedding, a service to celebrate the Diamond Jubilee of the Queen's coronation, services commemorating the centenary of World War I, and memorial services for national and international figures. There have been 16 royal weddings here since 1100. In 2011, the wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton occurred in Westminster Abbey. Prince William's mother, Princess Diana's funeral, was also conducted here. The Queen's Diamond Jubilee Galleries, which is an assortment of all kinds of memorabilia from the Queen's time and her place, are now in a display area for the Abbey's treasures high up around the nave. They even built a new Gothic tower with an elevator in it so you could get up to the galleries, and that was completed in 2018. There's an inscription on the wall outside Westminster Abbey. It reads, quote, "May God grant to the living grace, to the departed rest, to the church and to the world peace and concord, and to us sinners eternal life." That's it for today. Anyway, I have a few an announcement anyway. Near the door, or actually it's on a table over there by the water, there are some slips of paper, and we'd like to kind of one to a household if you could. And that tells you how you can find and get to all these different presentations on either Pulse or on YouTube. Actually, there's more on YouTube than we've given here, because I think there's 44 of them up on YouTube right now. And Pulse, there were 4, but they're trying to get about 5 more of them up there. So that's available to you over there. Next time, the motor vessel PVE will sail to the Iberian Peninsula arriving there on August 20th at 2 p.m. Okay, Sailor Talk, that's 1400. Come to that presentation and you're going to hear about the early history of Spain and the sad, sad story of Joanna the Mad and her husband, Philip the Handsome. Both parts will be played by yours truly. Thank you for the gift of your time. Are there any questions today? Look at that, I put them all to sleep.